So it's hard to talk about stories without talking about perspective, because every story is told from a unique perspective. If you took a lot of literature classes in school, you might have heard about things like unreliable narrators, and first-person narrators, and third-person narrators, and third-person omniscient narrator. It grows and grows. I'm sure there's more now. It's been a while since I've been in school. But perspective matters when we tell stories. And stories are not just in books. We tell ourselves stories all the time. And when we think about perspective, there is another perspective to think about, not just who is narrating the story. Takis, can you give me the next slide? And it is, click again, authors. The author of the story has a lot to do with how the story is told as well. Now, when I was in school, there's this thing called deconstructionism that was very, very popular, and it always said that you should look at a text just as the text itself and not think about the author or the author's intent or how the author's life informed what they wrote or what have you. And I think there's some merit in that, but it was a writing program, and we were a bunch of writers, and I thought it was very strange that we were sitting around talking about how writers who wrote the thing doesn't matter. I always thought that was kind of an odd thing. But there is another word that is very similar to author, and it is authority, right? Authorization. Who has it? What is yours? What kind of authority do you have when you tell a story? And what story do we tell? Give me another click. Who has it? What is yours? And what story do we tell? So I have a little, I guess I like to call it a meditation, but maybe it's more of an exercise. But I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures, and I want you to think about them. Our first picture is a map of the world. This is called the Mercator map. And this is a map that you probably saw in your elementary school growing up. Maybe you saw one in one of those encyclopedias. It's probably also on Google. But take a look at this map, because you see the continent of Africa and its size down there right in the middle of the map. And you see that big green lump up at the top? That is Greenland. Africa, the continent, is 14 times larger than the country of Greenland. Whose story are we telling? Whose world is it? So for perspective, here's another picture. And this picture is the outline of the continent of Africa and all of the countries that would fit inside it in terms of geography. Africa is as large as China and India and the United States and the UK and Eastern Europe and several other smaller countries, France and Spain and Italy. Africa is as large as all of those countries geographically. And then think back to that last map we just saw. Whose world are we talking about here? Now, the next map you may also have seen in various places. This is called the Gauss-Peters projection map, and it's what's called an area-accurate map. This map is created in such a way that the distortion of turning a round globe into a flat map does not change the size of the geographical areas. If you're a big West Wing fan, there was a really great episode where they talked about this map, and it's hilarious because look it up on YouTube, it's pretty good. But in this map, if you'll notice, the continent of Africa, and you see that white speck up at the top, that kind of smudge, that is Greenland. This is a much more accurate map of the sizes of the parts of the world. But you don't see this one nearly as often. What stories do we tell? Whose world is it? And for a change in perspective, this is a perfectly fine map, right? There is nothing inherently wrong with this map. Greenland is still too big. Yes, it has some of the same problems as that first map. But the Earth is a globe floating in space. In space, there is no north or south, no up or down, no above, no below. So this is as good as any other map. This would be as good as if this map had been flipped around. But we'll notice that the United States and Europe and many of the countries that map makers traditionally come from are on the bottom of the map instead of the top. Whose story are we telling? Whose world is it? Now, for perspective, we also have our Gauss-Peters projection map upside down. Once again, seems very unusual to us, but is in no way less accurate in terms of the space-time continuum. All of the land masses that I mentioned earlier, that those earlier map makers came from, are squished down here at the bottom of the map instead of being right in the middle. Whose story are we telling? Now, we could also tell a story wherein the Americas sideways look like a duck. This is also something that we could do when we talk about maps. Certainly an option. I like this next one. I think it's kind of cool. The next one, this is if you someone took the globe and tried to lay it flat, right? It would have cracks in it as you tried to lay it flat. This is what that might look like. And we see we have our poles, neither one of which is at the bottom or the top of the map. And we get a sense for how much water and how much land there might actually be on our globe. Now, geography is only one way to look at the world, right? So what if we thought about using the map in a different way? This is a map of the world adjusted for population. So rather than representing the geographic size of the different countries and continents, it represents the population size of the different countries and continents. What countries and continents might be at the center of this world? Whose story are we telling? Another way to think about this particular question, there are more people living inside. I keep pointing at the wrong direction for those on Zoom. There are more people living inside the circle on this map than living outside of the circle on this map. When we talk about the world, what kind of world are we talking about? Whose world is it? Now, of course, we have maps that may not even necessarily represent the world as it is today. We also have a map that shows us the supercontinent of Pangaea and where each of modern-day countries and continents would exist in that original giant landmass at the time of the early dinosaurs, right? What would it mean to live in a world like this? Next, we have another map, a slightly older map of a different provenance. This was, at one point, it's a Chinese map, and at one point it was considered to be proof that the Chinese were the first people to make a map of the entire globe, and the first people to be able to make a map of the entire globe. It was then found to be a fraud. It was not actually as old as people thought it was. So sometimes we can use maps to tell stories that are not necessarily true. This is as true of this map as it is for the maps that might be in your school classroom. So let's look back. We have this map, which we know is not true. And then we have this map, which we also know in its own way is not true. Personally, I prefer this map. This image, called the pale blue dot, was taken at the suggestion of my personal favorite astrophysicist, Carl Sagan, by the Voyager 1 spacecraft in 1990 as it was departing our planetary neighborhood and heading towards the fringes of the solar system. It turned around for one last time and took a shot of its home planet. This is an excerpt from Carl Sagan's book by the same name. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being that ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor, explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we have ever known.